Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us virtually today. My name is Hannah Yu, and I'm the Curator of Public Programs at the Fowler Museum at UCLA. We're truly glad to have you with us. Today, we're delighted to host a conversation with exhibition co-curators Dr. Daisy Ocampo Diaz and Lina Tejeda, who will share insights into the archival research behind the making of Fire Kinship, Southern California Native Ecology and Art. Dr. Daisy Ocampo Diaz, who is Caxcan, earned her Ph.D. in history from the University of California, Riverside in 2019. Her work in Native and public history informs museum exhibitions, historic preservation initiatives, and community-based archives. Through the integration of critical race theory, decolonial praxis, and tribal sovereignty, she centers Indigenous voices and traditions in public history, creating more inclusive and community-rooted narratives. Lina Tejeda is Pomo from her tribal homelands in Northern California and of Mexican heritage from Nayarit. She holds a master's degree in history from California State University with a focus on California Indian studies, museum studies, and public history. Tejeda is deeply committed to advocating for the return of sacred cultural items to the tribal nations from which they originate and to telling the true histories of California Indian peoples within institutional settings. In her spare time, she is a traditional Pomo dancer and actively engages in cultural practices, including basket weaving, materials gathering, regalia making, singing, and the preservation of Indigenous ecological knowledge. Before we begin, I invite you to take part in today's conversation. If questions come up during the program, please share them using the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and feel free to upvote those you'd like us to address. We'll set aside the last 10 minutes for Q&A. And with that, it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Daisy Ocampo Diaz and Lina Tejeda.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Hannah, for that introduction. I won't reintroduce myself, but I do want to share that I'm very happy to be here. We just had our closing gathering. The exhibit is still open for not much longer, but I think a couple weeks or maybe three. So we're happy to be here to share a little bit more um, on the research that took place behind this exhibit. There's a lot of research that took place, and there was also a lot of grappling with the archive and what it is and how Lina and I were going to approach it. Um, Broadly speaking, obviously, a lot of the research that went into this exhibit did rely on institutional archives, right? So your repositories held at like state archives and university archives and whatnot. But also we were thinking about how a lot of these archives are also not neutral, right? There are a lot of documents that are in these archives that wrote about Native people in very colonial ways, whether it was linguists or ethnographers, anthropologists, or whatnot. So there's also a lot of reclaiming and a lot of critical thinking that has to go into how we approach a lot of these documents. Um, we also just kind of were thinking about the archives within a community context and using our own training. And we were just broadly thinking about archives as a space where we hold, we store, and we also document knowledge, right? And these are inclusive of histories, and how memory is activated in that process. So we'll kind of share a little bit more about that, and I will go ahead and turn it over to Lina so she can share a little bit more about our curatorial approach.
Thank you so much, Daisy. Welcome, everybody. I'm so happy that you're all here today for, I think, our final curatorial talk that we're having. So it's a little bit of a bittersweet moment, but I think we're also really excited to talk about this and have this conversation because we haven't really had too much programming on our archival research that we did do. But yeah, I think that's it. I think we're ready to begin. Okay, so we are talking about archiving fire kinship. So each question that we had during our curatorial approach really challenged us to reach into our academic training and our community pedagogy. So we have reciprocity, consent, collaboration, label creating, storytelling, listening, and these questions that you see here on the screen are really the questions that really help to shape the three rooms that we have. And we kind of, that's how curatorially we think of the exhibit is we have three main rooms. And then in between, scattered in between each one, we have different commissioned artworks from different Native artists in Southern California. So we have questions like kinship with community members as curatorial process, kinship in the form of relationships between people, place, and fire. Some of the overarching questions that we have are how can we think about fire kinship through the lens of community-based Indigenous histories? What were the colonial and settler colonial assaults on this relationship with fire? How are Southern California Indian communities revitalizing these relationships? So these are the questions that we had in mind when really thinking about how we wanted to tell these stories or not tell these stories but share these stories from the community. Next slide, please.
All right. Um, so I kind of wanted to, we wanted to take the opportunity to explore these three different questions since they did end up shaping the three major rooms. We thought we'd kind of walk you all through the exhibit and explore in each room how we approached research and also how we approached the archive. So the first room that we have, to be honest with you, at the beginning was actually going to be at the end. But there was something that clicked for us. So it was gonna kind of start a little bit more with fire panic and wildfires and work our way backwards, looking at settler colonialism and ending up within kind of more of this space of community histories of fire. But we ended up putting that in the front, and it off the bat started with a sand painting, but really I'll just kind of briefly talk about all the different ways we were exploring in this first room, knowledge production, right? One, we realized that we wanted to actually begin this exhibit with Tongva people, which is the right thing to do, and reaching out to the Tongva cultural collective and working with folks. Again, as Lina mentioned, as we were thinking about kinship, we were thinking about kinship with different community members that we were working with and were informing the exhibit, but also kinship in that relationship between people, fire, and place. So we worked with the Tongva Collective to really bring this sand painting to life, right? And we just kind of this sand painting is really an embodiment of portions of their creation story as it pertains to fire, um, which brings Tamet, the sun, right? And it brings fire to the people, to the land. So we really thought it was important to just bring us and center us to where we are at UCLA, whose lands we're on, and how we can even think about fire now, right? And I think when one of the interventions, archival interventions that I think was made there is when we look at archival material, we are often, by bias and by design, looking at archival material that's often narrating histories through the nation state, right? So a lot of archival material is looking at questions of conquest. It's looking at questions of nation building. That is kind of what is at the center of what gets documented and what is the majority of what we find in archives. So we thought, how can we rethink history making while putting communities at that center of that archiving, right? And really centering cultural institutions such as creation narratives and basket weaving and cultural burns and ceremonies at the center. So that's one of those interventions that we tried to do in that first room. We really wanted to make sure that visitors understood that this Garden of Eden that a lot of settlers, as they were moving west and, guided by the gold rush and whatnot, that this Garden of Eden that they had seen was not just that way out of coincidence, right? That this was a stewarded ecosystem and a result, right, of California Indian people tending to the landscape, including cultural burns. So there's a really big focus on that ecosystem and different plant material and also the artistic expressions, which to us is that archiving that went into that first room. For this, the sand painting, we worked with Lázaro Arvizu Jr. And one of the things that we did to build an environment, a little micro environment, if you may, was adding audio, which was acquired through NASA and then the European Space Agency on this joint task to essentially capture audio of sun oscillations, which are pretty much the kind of explosive activity that takes place on the surface of the sun. And they were able to capture that data. And then that raw data was made into the audio that was used for this exhibit. So we worked with the different scholars that were on that mission. Next slide, please. We as kind of just emphasizing this message of plant material and stewardship, and also if you have this robust and kind of healthy material like canoes and like basket weaving, really it's a testament to how well land has been tended to. Baskets were pretty prominent in our exhibit. Um, and Lina and I approach basket weaving as an archival repository for sure, right? In that it documents memory of the land and fire. A basket does not come into being without fire, period. So it refers to the idea that baskets are not just this utilitarian object, right? But that it's truly a repository of cultural knowledge, of history, and of relationships with the land. There's so much information as you speak with basket weavers about plant ecology, about doctoring plants, right? And diagnosing them and figuring out what they need. About seasonal cycles, you'll also learn what seasons and how often and frequency, harvesting practices, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of technique and design that goes into basket weaving that we wanted to make sure that we put within the context of knowledge. I think for a long time, baskets were seen as crafts, and there's just so much more that goes into them. So again, basket weaving is really outside of the domain of your typical written documents, which is important, right? Because baskets are these living relatives within communities, right? It's not just the basket, it's a being And we've kind of developed language. We're trying to develop language. We would call them object relatives, right? Because that would be the more candid way of referring to baskets. So we worked with a lot of basket weavers that were elders, but also people that were learning, right? So we tried to highlight that intergenerational connection there. And, we did go out to weavers. We did go out to different like junkus patches to learn more. And here to the left, we have the canoe. This was actually a replica of a canoe that was found in Lake Elsinore, which the original canoe is currently at the San Diego History Center. It was made by Willie Pink, who's Cupeño. And what's really interesting about archives within this context is it's not enough to just preserve and keep material, right? It is about what you're going to do with that knowledge, right? So there's kind of something cool that happens within Indigenous archives. It's the programming, it's the education, the transmission that's really key to bring healing and well-being back into the community. So from this canoe, and Willie's been making quite a few of them. His goal is really to take this one preserved canoe that's over there. He tested the wood material and is really embarking a journey to revitalizing canoe culture within Luiseño and different coastal communities here in California. Next slide, please.
Okay, so we have a lot of historical photographs throughout our exhibit, and they are not just about illustrating the past, but they're also about activating relationships between memory, land, and continuity. We really felt like they were evidence of presence and that continuity from the past. They demonstrate that these practices have been here for a long time. And I think another really cool piece of information with these photographs in particular is there are a lot of photographs of like women who are doing these practices. They're gathering, they're making oyas, they're carrying their oyas. They're in the photo on the right, she's sifting acorn, so she's making like acorn powder to eat. And these photos really resonated with Daisy and I because, if you've had the opportunity to do a curatorial walk with myself or Daisy, we talk about a lot how we are heavily influenced by these photos because we were so influenced by our grandmothers. So there's kind of like this personal experience that we have that you see reflected in the exhibit also, where we have a lot of respect for these women who, in these photographs, so these photographs are often taken through extractive means. And I think it's really important to point that out or through anthropological lenses, right? So really, we wanted to give these images their own story so we can basically change the meaning. By using them in Fire Kinship, we're able to take that power away from those anthropologists and give it to the communities to reclaim these photos of survivance and these images of that show the relationships between land and memory. So we next slide, please.
So we as we're kind of moving through the exhibit and into the what is it, the fire scars. Um we really wanted to understand what were the colonial, which are the very early stages of settlers coming in, to then the settler colonial assaults on this relationship between people, place, and fire. There is quite a bit. We weren't quite sure what we were going to find, just how much documented information is there, and there's no document that's giving it to you straight, right? You just have to understand California Indian history, unpack kind of all these different colonial iterations, and then really assess what these documents, as you reach them, are actually telling you about how this relationship is disrupted. So one of the things that some of the kind of documents that we found in the archive were Spanish diaries. And I'll get into some of these in a little bit. We found the Arriaga Proclamation. I'll get into that one because that I thought was super significant. We have the California, the when California became a state in 1850, there was all these statues that were put in place, and one of them was the outline of cultural burns. We found a lot of diseños. That's kind of how we approached it because that was a major shift in land ownership and Smokey Bear and World War II campaign posters. But I included in the slide here the Spanish Proclamation, the Arriaga Proclamation in 1773, I believe. Now this document, I just a little bit more about the journey of how we came to it. We worked pretty closely with the Malky Museum on the Morongo Indian Reservation and Banning, California out here. I just want to say thank you to Amanda Castro, their director, and also their board members, Marty Pablo and Aaron Sabel, who facilitated a lot of these documents and rights to use them in the exhibit. There was a cadre of um, some of them were anthropologists, some of them were non-native California Indian scholars that were already asking this question the 70s and 80s about California Indian cultural burns. They were looking at it the perspective of basket weaving, from plant science, from a lot of different perspectives. And some of these scholars were Lo Bean, who recently passed, I think a few years ago, maybe. MCAT Anderson, who's at Davis, UC Davis, Bev Ortiz, and specifically Thomas Blackburn. A lot of these documents came from Before the Wilderness, which is a collection of a lot of their essays, which includes some excerpts of these different documents. And really, our work was to trace, right, to follow the cookie crumbs and trace the archival record and get to the original archives and then request the digitizing of full documents. So the Arriaga Proclamation, I think, is one of the key documents in this exhibit. I think when we look at California Indian history and the outline of cultural burns, scholars are really focused in on 1850. But really, the statue is just a couple sentences long, and that's all it is. I mean, in effect, it still banned fires, but I think we really need to consider that this period of 1773 is the Spanish mission period, and really we need to explore, right, the Spanish mission period and the relationship of outlawing burns because this proclamation is extensive. There's so much to be said about criminalizing and punishment and infantilizing of Native people as well as Native knowledge. And I thought this proclamation just really needed a huge platform within definitely the scholarly community. Next slide, please.
Okay, so next we have a conversation about our ranching economy, which kind of follows the after the Treaty of Hidalgo that was signed with the United States and Mexico after the Spanish-American War in 1848. So we see all these lands that are being given out and being sold and being bartered through this system. And right here we have Santa Monica Boca or San Vicente y Santa Monica Rancho in Los Angeles. And so in our exhibit, so you can find all of these. I believe it's on the California State Archive. You can find all of these, and there are so many throughout the state. But we selected a handful that are very relevant to the Los Angeles area or just our general audience, right? So we're looking at Southern California. So I believe we included one for San Bernardino, one in Temecula, the Santa Monica one, and I also think over here in Riverside. So they're a part of a larger connection that makes up the Spanish and Mexican land grant records that also include expedientes or written documents regarding grant petition and other related documents. Each diseño includes naturally occurring boundaries such as rivers, mountains, rocks, rock outcropping, and trees as markers. Many of these diseños have been labeled as neighboring properties, and as part of the initial land grant process, all borders are agreed upon by surrounding landowners. The diseños also show existing travel routes, so a lot of them were created along these travel routes for easier access, and there's locations of houses and local place names. We're really able to see the local place names throughout our exhibit, which I think is really important. And following California statehood in 1850, Congress passed the Land Act of 1851, creating the Board of Land Commissioners. The board used diseños, expedientes, U.S. U.S. Surveyor General surveys, and other related title documents to create the cities that surround these places. And so we see like these larger urbanized areas around where they had these diseños. So they kind of acted as like a hub, right? Next slide, please. So next we have these Spanish diaries that Daisy had talked about in a previous slide. So here we have Rivera y Moncada diary. So Fernando Rivera y Moncada was a military governor of California from 1774 to 1777. And here we really see in this diary entry, he gives us the reasoning for why they wanted to prohibit fire, why they wanted to suppress the use of fire. And I think this one was really interesting to Daisy and I, which is why we selected it to be shown in our exhibit, because it talks about in here how the Indians are burning all the land for the cows, right? So the cattle have no food. So this is another reason why they are trying to stop fire from happening, why it's really important to suppress fire now. And they didn't understand it. And I think one of the important things to remember, and a lot of people don't know, is that when the Spanish came here, California Indians already had a developed ecosystem. We already had a developed, I guess in a sense, agriculture, but we didn't use the same kind of agriculture that was used over in Europe. So when they came over, they didn't understand. They thought that there was something lacking here in the state of California. They thought there was something lacking, that we didn't know how to tend to the land, but they didn't realize that this use of fire and the type of agriculture that we had here was very sufficient and actually sustained our communities at the time. So we thought these were really important. There are a lot of other ones that can be found in the Mulkey Press book. The book is Before the Wilderness. We found a lot of these diary entries in there. Next slide, please. So these posters are World War II posters, and they're World War II era posters. So these World War II photos that you see on the left, they come from the University of Edinburgh. It's the Fire Research Archive that was acquired from the U.S. Forest Services. And now these images are very rare. They're obviously no longer in production, but they're very rare to find, and you can't really find them. So you're able to download them and print them up, which is what we were able to do for this. But we thought these were really important because this is where we really start instilling fear into the American people about fire, right? So we're talking about fire as the enemy. So you see some imagery here. We wanted to show a couple of these images, and obviously you see like a swastika in there, but also being sensitive and knowing that we don't really want to show a lot of these because of that imagery, but we still have to show a little bit of it. We still want to see like how severe this fight against the enemy is and what relating fire comes to. So next we have Smokey, and obviously the photos on the left are not really for children to to absorb and get imagery from. So we need to make it more palatable for children. So then we start seeing the creation of Smokey the Bear. And this comes from the archives of the records of the Office of Government Reports from the National Archives. So there's like a whole, they have every single year, they have a lot of archives in there. So really, we were just sifting through those and we were focusing on this World War II era where we're really trying to instill fear and like it's your responsibility to not allow fire to turn into wildfires while you're camping or, just using fire responsibly. So, we have cigarettes. We don't want to, throw those out irresponsibly. Really, it's just about being responsible about fire. Next slide, please.
All right. And as we are kind of entering the within the exhibit space, that last room, which is looking at the way that different Southern California Indian communities are revitalizing their relationship with fire. Um, as we are thinking about the reclamation process and revitalizing and also realizing that we are in a unique space right now of making sure that this exhibit was also um, shifting the historical narrative, right? So that this exhibit was then going to be referenced in the future in terms because folks are just not just now, but I would say in the last 10, perhaps 15 years, have been developing a lot of amazing programming, right, around the reclamation of fire. So I wanted to share with you all. I wasn't sure if we had any archival folks here in the room. I did do a book review not too long ago, and I thought it really spoke to some of the work that Lina and I did. Her name is Rose Myron, and she's the director of the Newberry Library in Chicago. And her book is called Indigenous Archival Activism. It's one of the few books that are out there that's looking at Indigenous archives. And she worked with, gosh, I forgot what tribe, I feel bad. Um, Stockbridge tribe somewhere in the East Coast. And anyways, they have their own tribal archive, right? And there are certain claims that she made in her book that I thought were really relevant. One is the responsibility for her work, but also this project was access. Like Lina and I had to build a puzzle. Like we didn't just have to find the pieces. We had the puzzle. We didn't even know what the end product was going to look like because we were truly gathering archival material from a lot of different places. So it was really about doing patchwork with a lot of these documents, and that's that access. We wanted to make this information accessible. It was also important that as we did the research, we were always in conversation with sovereignty here in California, which is just a humongous discourse. We have federally recognized tribes, other tribes that are not recognized but are still sovereign in their own capacity. And ultimately, we wanted to make sure that we were asserting um, Native Indigenous authority over the historical narrative, right? And the way that we did that was making sure that community members were part of the process as we were developing labels. So one story, we didn't just try and finesse it ourselves, right? We worked with people to make sure that that label kind of was able, that story was able to be shared in the label in the right way. So we worked with folks in that way and also narrative transformation. And that's where that last room where we're at right now, we wanted to make sure we were producing new historical narratives of Native people telling their own stories and not really relying just on colonial interpretation. So we did want to take this exhibit into the present. And I think it's also important that as we're taking things into the present, that it wasn't just about preserving historical material, but also looking at the present as something that is practiced, as something that's carried and renewed and activated. And kind of Lina will get into the next slide in a little bit. Um, about um, looking at the ways that communities are reclaiming and almost also learning across the state of California from each other. And we thought that was really important, that archives in this case and the recovery and the reclamation of these documents and these histories aren't just to keep this material, it's about shaping a future direction of reclamation. And so that's kind of what our intention was for this next room. Next slide, please.
So these photos right here, again, like Daisy was saying, we're now talking about revitalization. We're talking about reclamation. So we're reclaiming these, and really it's like a source of empowerment, right? I think one thing to know is some archives are not meant to be stored. They're meant to be practiced, carried, and renewed. And I saw that quote somewhere, and that was something that really stuck out to Daisy and I while we were doing some research, because again, trying to take away the focus and centering state nationhood, or nation state archives, like we're really trying to look at the community and centering them when it comes to archival work. So documenting the present, current, revitalizing for future historical narratives and practice. We see a lot of it that is dovetailing with some Black Lives Matter, Confederate monuments being removed, where it's about documenting shifts. We're doing contesting of the past and doing community sovereignty. So right here, we really see this in this beautiful picture of these lovely folks up in Karuk territory who, it's a women's K-Trek. So it's like a training program that teaches women, Indigenous women, and even includes some queer folks to come and kind of try to dismantle, not necessarily dismantle because they're their own thing, but also we see a dismantling and like a rejection of the modern day firefighting, which is very patriarchal. So we really see that with this image and the work that they're doing up there. So we worked with Burn Boss and Chairman Wes Ruiz Jr. from La Jolla Band of Indians. So this image on the left, you'll see this image of a Juncus patch being burned over here in Anza, California, and like Cahuilla territory. And this cultural burn, this is, I want to say they said about 200 years was the last time that this piece of land actually saw a burn. So that this Juncus patch, Juncus is one of the materials that are used for basket weaving. So part of our archival practice was generating new materials such as like a land back map and keeping it updated throughout the exhibit. So we actually changed our land back map that we have in this last room 3 times throughout the course of the exhibit, which honestly, every single time we were so excited to share with the Fowler, hey, this needs to be updated. And I want to say too, I believe a week and a half ago, there was another massive win for the Agua Caliente Band of Indians too, where they just won, I think, 625 acres that was given back to them from the state and different like land conservancies. So this is a really cool, the map is like a really cool way to document how things are kind of ever changing, and that's the goal, right? Eventually maybe we'll see so much more land that is given back to sovereign communities to be able to have control over the stewardship of the land. So through the lens of California Indian feminism, going back to the Karuk women's training group, excuse me, sorry. Next slide.
Um, so I wanted, so Lina and I didn't just kind of, right, there's these 3 different rooms that we've kind of outlined and all the different archival and community research that went behind it. We were also aware that there's this huge gap, right, from like 1850 to the present where fire didn't take place right? And as we were talking to a lot of community members, they were like, wow, we haven't burned in a long time. I don't know, right? And there was just a lot of I don't knows, and really it is the reality of it, it's the it is how do you say the materializing of having cultural burns be banned for that long, right? Like you lose, not lose, right? But like you haven't accessed that memory with fire in a really long time. And as we look at this question of erasure and a gap, right, in the archive, and how we were gonna try and contend with that. I thought, Lena and I thought it was really important that this is the work where a lot of the artists would play a really critical role, right? And breaking that silence. And just for a little bit of definition, the speculative archiving is essentially a way to just, as I mentioned, resist archival gaps that would lead people to say something like, oh, well, California Indians lost their fire, therefore it doesn't matter anymore. We were really trying to combat something like that. And so speculative archiving, which is a lot of work that artists and community do, which is using artwork and the imagination to fill in that space and really troubling that line between what has been saved in the colonial record keeping practices and then what is the future of that. And so um um, yeah, so some of the guiding questions was like, okay, how can we still, even though there's been this gap of culture of banning cultural burns for this long, how can we still assert like presence and authority over the historical narrative? So we worked with Wishoyot, Albitri, we worked with Leah Matafragua, who's Chumash, and Emily Clark's poetry is divine. The Yamai Collective, that's a lot of them are from Pachanga, Gerald Clark. And really the goal is how can we make visible that which has been made invisible through all these different iterations of bands and of cultural burns, right? And so speculative archiving, it's just a corrective tool to combat erasure and just kind of break up that silence, right? And making sure that there's still different ways of experiencing this information and this history that are embodied through the paintings, through installations, right? Immersive installations, and really focus in on reasserting self and community and place. Next slide. Lena and I did not make any of this happen. We promised, like the different proposals that came in from artists, the three women were just in sync, like literally from Wishoyot's Tongva women who are her paintings were looking at Tongva women and all the different ways that they were fighting settler colonialism and fighting territorial claims and language reclamation, those three paintings. And Emily looking at violence against women and feminism. And then Leah's work is just very beautiful, right? And so um, we thought that these were all ways that poppies wove through all three of these. So we kind of put them together and tried to create an immersive, warm environment that really centers healing and strength and agency of women throughout this exhibit. And there's a lot of field trips to the exhibit. A lot of folks love the poppies, and just the shadow work is so beautiful in Leah's installation. And I think the Tongva, I forgot which woman it was that has the chin tattoos interlaced with the poppy. So there's just a lot of beautiful um, um, messages that are there. Next slide, please.
Okay, so this image now, we're talking about contemporary artwork and how people are using historic photos. If you see in this photo, so this image, this art piece was created by one of our collaborators who really helped us a lot on the exhibit from pretty much the very beginning to the end. Like she was identified very early on as a collaborator and as somebody who holds a lot of knowledge. And she's also boots on the ground doing fire. She's actually one of the people in the photo of the women's K-Trex up in Karuk territory. So Marlena, this is her work called Grandma's Hands. So Tutu's Hands, it's called. And she is Payam Kawichum, and her grandma's hands are weaving, and it features her family's kupa basket from her aunt Bernice Ponchetti. She also used archival photos of her ancestors. Up there in the corner, you can see, and she like her own photography, but also doing like digital artwork on top of it. And we just thought this was a really beautiful piece, and we wanted to include it in this last room because, again, it shows survivance. It shows that there is still a relationship and interconnectedness between um, what she's doing, what her grandmother did, what her ancestors in the back have done, and just really that connection to the cosmos, as you see in the image, and also the land. You can see this, I believe that's sage in the background. So you really see that. And that basket is one of the historic baskets that was lent from Marlena's family for our exhibit. And I think this one was dated back to the early 1900s or the late 1800s as well. So, a little quote that Marlena said was, "The artwork represents the flow of water, which women are made up of and hold in their bodies. The piece pays tribute to them and to the medicine and knowledge instilled in me. It is a powerful representation of my family's legacy, strength, and medicine of Native women throughout generations and into the future." So you really see here again, there's this very big call to feminisms in our exhibit. And I think it's pretty obvious, again, as Daisy and myself being women and being Native and Indigenous women here in this state, and um, really how that all comes together and is tied together. We thought that that was really beautiful. Next slide, please. So, we are coming to wrap up our presentation today. We're only in the last few minutes, and here, Rose Mirren emphasizes archival records can be critical in filling gaps that settler colonial violence has created, but they are incomplete without the knowledge and interpretation of community members. And at the heart of this exhibition, and especially in our curatorial process, was community collaboration. That was the heartbeat of everything, and it still is. So we really worked with community, and I think one of the really cool things about doing this exhibit that Daisy and I have talked about, and as you know, last weekend we had our closing ceremony, and really just one of our favorite things has been seeing Native people come into this exhibit and recognize themselves in it. That has been the most rewarding thing about this exhibit. And that's all I would like to say about that, because I'm going to get emotional here in a second. But Daisy, would you like to say anything about this community collaboration and Native folks seeing themselves in the exhibition?
Yeah, I think Alina and I have just had the privilege of um just walking through the exhibit when no one's noticing and folks just realizing like that that's their baskets or people taking pictures with their own baskets in the exhibit. I think Lena and I really wanted to honor the people that are learning basket weaving after all these years. We had people's baskets. That was their first basket. Some people may have thought like it should have an expert basket in there, but I think we had just such an appreciation for the building of new basket weavers and how beautiful that is because it took elders so much work in these past two, three generations to recover basket weaving techniques, which are still happening right now. And so I think for folks to be able to say like that's my basket, or just some of the connections that we made between like Camaray's first basket and her great great grandma's photograph, which we had by coincidence like selected in the exhibit, and putting those two together where they belong. Um, I think that's what it was just the cherry on top, and just to
Yeah.
see folks be playful in the space, to be seen, and to bring like 20 people from their families to show them like their contribution to the exhibit. I think that's so important. And it goes without saying that this exhibit was built mostly out of community loans. So everything you saw here belonged to someone. And that's why that kinship with collaborators were so important. We didn't pull anything from the shelves. And that's a whole different conversation, but we worked with communities. So everything there on exhibit, for folks that are local, were able to see themselves. And we know that there are a lot of different groups and class visits from like Noli school on Saboba that came down. So these are all just really important because, as we know, the way that Native people have been represented in museums, right? It historically from like the first world fairs here in the US have been terrible. And so we hope that Lina and I did our best in honoring and playing a little bit more of a corrective shift in how that work is done.
Yeah. So thank you everybody for joining us. We do have a couple questions. A couple of them actually that came in, like one from Sarah was already answered. So I think we're gonna go ahead and move on to the next one. I'll go ahead and read it and we'll decide whoever feels most comfortable answering the question. So we have a question from Bruno. What are the future plans for the exhibit once it closes? Is there an online exhibit, a book, etc.? Thank you for
Hmm.
your incredible talk.
Well, I'm sure there's like short-term things, and then I think short-term, I think Lina and I just really poured ourselves into this exhibit, and this was a dream, and this was enough, for me, and what will come out of it. I think I just remain engaged in public history projects that really look to bridge these different spaces, institutional spaces and resources with community objectives. And this was one of these ways that it worked out really well. Lina and I will be presenting at a conference later this year, and just kind of share about kind of new directions for public history. And but we really hope, beyond what gets produced from this project, are the conversations that took place and that we really participated in the dialogue. I think we're going to keep seeing this in the news. We're going to be seeing this with city planners. And I'm hoping that we just open the door for a different perspective.
Yeah.
Lena?
Definitely, I agree with all that you just said right there. I think, fortunately, our, what is that called? The Matterport is available on the Fowler's website, and I hope that that's going to be there forever. I'm not sure if somebody else has an answer for that, but there is an online what 3D, like a 3D tour that you can do, so you could read all of the labels, you could read all of like the big descriptions, you could look at all of the items, and you can just work your way around. So that we think that that is a really good way for this exhibit to live on. And I think we have another question that kind of expands on this question that I would like to know your thoughts on too, Daisy. So what future directions would you like to see museums take when it comes to integrating Indigenous ecological knowledge into their exhibitions? Do you see the themes of fire kinship continuing to evolve in future research or exhibitions, and how?
Can you read that again? I'm sorry.
Yeah. What future directions would you like to see museums take when it comes to integrating Indigenous traditional ecological knowledge into their exhibitions? So how do we want to see this work continue in exhibitions that go beyond the Fowler?
Yeah, I think yeah, so tr ta tech traditional environmental ecological knowledge that's referenced in a couple different ways, TK. It's happening across different spaces, right? Not just museums. It is happening in like the Indigenous Agriculture Collective. It is happening with Native American land conservancies, doing a lot of really heavy lifting work of receiving land back within their control, and just all the enormous weight that goes into reestablishing those relationships, as well as I can only imagine fundraising and all this work. So TK is happening across the board, and I think museums should be engaged in these conversations. I mean, it's pressing, it's here. Like climate change is real, wildfires are real, and they are not happening as like background information. Like these are pressing conversations. And I think what's beautiful is visitors want to learn. I think we've built a generation of youth and a new generation that is really familiar with decolonizing and understanding what that is and just not knowing how to be involved. I think one of the ways that museums can really um, do a little bit more, not even just more, but like think more expansively about programming and, just doing more dynamic programming that gets people back to the land in some capacity. Um, so yeah, those are, and just continuing on those collaborations and making sure that, a lot of these projects are reciprocal and that they're consensual and that um they're in the direction that communities need and want.
Definitely. I agree with all that. I think it's also really important to point out that there are a lot of other Indigenous curators who are being asked to be a part of exhibitions, who are also able to keep this push and hold accountability to the museum spaces to, not just be extractive and be representative of our communities, but also holding them accountable to work directly with our community so we are able to tell our own stories. I think that that's really really important. And I also think too that museums, especially in the light of everything that's going on with museums and DEI and all the things with this current administration we have, and like funding and these types of programs being cut, right? It's going to take a lot of courage from museums, especially in institutions where they do get funding from the federal government, right? So it's going to take a lot of accountability and a lot of courage and a lot of patience from museums to work with our communities in order to share this knowledge that we've been holding for years. It's just been asleep, we've always held it within us. So I think with that, I think that is the end of this conversation. And I'm just so grateful to everyone who has come and visited Fire Kinship, had a conversation with Daisy or myself, and has joined any of these online talks, either with us or with other people from the museum who are, talking about fire kinship. But yeah, the fire continues. I'll say that. I said that in my closing speech. The closing, yeah, our fire is going to continue on beyond this.
Wow. And I think
Um,
Anna, okay, go ahead.
yeah, thank you so much, Daisy and Lina, for this thoughtful and engaging conversation. Your reflections on the archival research and collaborative processes behind fire kinship have given us all a deeper appreciation for the histories, relationships, and knowledge that shape this important work. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. We're truly grateful for your time, attention, and participation in this conversation. If you'd like to revisit today's program or share it with others, a recording will be available soon on the Fowler Museum's YouTube channel. If you enjoyed today's program and would like to support future programs like this one, we invite you to consider becoming a Fowler member. Your support helps make exhibitions, programs, and public conversations like this possible. We also hope you'll stay connected by signing up for our newsletter and following us on social media at Fowler Museum, where we share updates on upcoming exhibitions and events. On behalf of the Fowler Museum at UCLA, thank you for spending your afternoon with us, and we look forward to welcoming you again virtually or in person. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.
Everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.